Have you ever looked at your own reflection and seen a ghost? That's what this lake is for me. A vast, shimmering mirror holding the ghost of my other half. My brother. My twin. Elias. Every ripple on the surface is a memory, distorting his face, trying to pull him under again. They said his death was an accident, a tragic, unforeseeable twist of fate, a slip on a rain-slicked pier, a plunge into dark, churning water. They said it was nobody's fault. But I know the truth. I am, or I was, Ilara and Elias, two halves of a single soul. We weren't just siblings. We were a matched set. We finished each other's sentences, felt each other's joys and pains. When he broke his arm at 10, my left arm ached for a week. When I had my first heartbreak at 16, he sat with me all night, not saying a word, just sharing the weight of a sadness he couldn't fully understand, but felt all the same. Our world was this lake, and the sprawling estate that bordered it, Sunhaven. Our grandfather built it from nothing, a self-made man who believed in legacy. He left it all to us, equally. The business, the property, everything. But he left it with a condition, a test. We had to run it together for 5 years before either of us could sell our share. Harmony was his inheritance. He knew money could corrupt, but he believed our bond was incorruptible. He was wrong. There was a serpent in our Sunhaven, a man with a smile as sharp as a razor and eyes that calculated everything, even friendship. Julian Thorne. He and Elias were business partners, best friends since college. Where Elias was all heart and passion, Julian was all cold, hard ambition. I never trusted him. There was something in the way he looked at our legacy, not as a home, but as a prize, a stepping stone. The night it happened, the air was thick with the promise of a storm. Elias and Julian were down at the boathouse, going over plans for a new development, a project Julian was desperate to get off the ground, one that required liquidating part of our inheritance. Elias was against it. He loved this land. I was in the main house, watching the lightning dance over the mountains, a knot of anxiety in my stomach. I heard raised voices carried on the wind, then a crash. Not thunder. Something else. Something wooden. Splintering. I ran. The rain started to fall, cold and sharp. I slipped on the same pier they said he slipped on. I saw them. 2 silhouettes against the flickering dock lights. They were arguing, hands flying, gestures sharp. And then, a push. It wasn't a slip. It was a hard, violent shove. I saw my brother's arms flail, saw the shock on his face, a face identical to my own for a single horrifying second before he vanished into the black, churning water. Elias! My scream was torn away by the wind. Julian stood at the edge of the pier, frozen. He didn't jump in. He didn't call for help. He just watched. And then he turned and he saw me. Our eyes met across the rain-lashed darkness. In his, I didn't see panic or fear. I saw a cold, terrifying calculation. And then he ran towards me, not to help me up. His hands were on my shoulders, his face a mask of fabricated grief. Ilara! My God, Ilara! He slipped, he fell, it was an accident. I was in shock, numb. The world was spinning. The love of my life, my other half, was gone. And the man who had taken him from me was holding me, whispering lies into my ear, his grip tight, almost threatening. The days that followed were a blur of police questions, sympathetic faces, and a grief so profound I thought it would swallow me whole. Julian was the perfect mourner. He gave statements, he coordinated the search, he held my hand at the funeral, his eyes perpetually glistening with unshed tears. He was a masterful performer. But I knew. I saw the truth. And that knowledge was a seed of ice in my heart. The will was read. With Elias gone, his share of the estate. It was complicated, but Julian, through a web of business contracts and clauses I was too grief-stricken to understand, stood to gain control. A lot of control. The development project he and Elias had argued about, it could now proceed. Greed. It was all for greed. I went to the police. I told them what I saw, but it was my word against his. A grieving twin, seeing things in the storm, they said. No evidence. Julian, the upstanding businessman, the grieving best friend, his story was clean, simple. Mine was the rambling of a broken heart. They closed the case. Death by misadventure. I stood at my brother's grave, the fresh earth a raw wound in the grass. The ice in my heart hardened into diamond. Justice had failed. The world had failed Elias. So it fell to me. I couldn't be Ilara anymore. Ilara was a victim. Ilara was powerless. Ilara was a ghost, just like her brother. I had to become someone else, someone hard, someone capable of deception to match Julian's own. I sold my share of everything I could, took the money, and I disappeared. I spent a year in shadow, learning how to change my appearance, my voice, my mannerisms, how to build a flawless fake identity. I studied business, finance, everything Julian respected. I immersed myself in his world from a distance, learning his habits, his weaknesses. I was going to walk into the lion's den, not as a lamb, but as a hunter in designer clothing. My name was now Sloane Mercer, a sharp, sophisticated, and slightly mysterious investor from abroad. And I was coming to Sunhaven. I was coming for Julian Thorne. I looked one last time at my reflection in the lake. The ghost of Ilara stared back, her eyes filled with a sorrow that would never leave. But in superposed over her, I saw the cold, determined face of Sloane. For you, Elias, I will tear his perfect world down, brick by bloody brick. I will make him feel everything you felt. The betrayal, the helplessness, the fall. Infiltrating Julian's world was like trying to break into a fortress made of money, influence, and beautiful, smiling lies. He had built an empire on my brother's grave, and he'd surrounded himself with people who either didn't know the truth or didn't care to see it. My first step was the charity gala for the Elias Vance Memorial Foundation. The irony was so thick you could taste it. Julian had created it, of course. A foundation in my brother's name, funded by the profits from the very development project they'd argued about. He'd built a monument to the man he'd destroyed, and he was praised for his generosity. It made me sick. I remember walking in, my heart hammering against my ribs like a trapped bird. This was it. No turning back. The room was a sea of sequins and smug satisfaction. And there he was, at the center of it all. Julian Thorne, 3 years older, a little more gray at the temples, but with the same polished, predatory grace. He was holding court, a glass of champagne in his hand, a story on his lips that had his sycophants laughing on cue. I felt a surge of white-hot anger, so intense I thought I might faint. I wanted to scream. I wanted to launch myself at him to scratch that smug smile off his face. But I didn't. I was Sloane Mercer now, and Sloane was ice. I made my move, guided by a contact I'd paid handsomely to make an introduction. "Julian," the contact said, "I'd like you to meet Sloane Mercer. She's new to the city, an investor with a remarkable track record in Europe. Sloane, this is Julian Thorne, the man who makes everything happen around here." He turned, and his eyes, they scanned me, not as a man looks at a woman, but as a shark looks at a potential meal, weighing, measuring. I offered a cool, professional smile. "A pleasure, Mr. Thorne. I said, my voice lower, steadier than Alara's had ever been. I've heard so much about your accomplishments. Please, call me Julian, he said, taking my hand. His grip was firm, confident, the hand that pushed my brother. And the pleasure is all mine. Any friend of Charles is a friend of mine. What brings a woman of your obvious talents to our little city? Opportunity, I said simply, letting my gaze sweep the room before returning to his. I find the most interesting opportunities are often in places everyone else has overlooked. His eyes sparkled with interest. I'd said the magic word, opportunity. That night was the first thread. I was careful, elusive. I spoke of my fictitious past in broad strokes, hinted at vast resources, and expressed a specific interest in sustainable, high-value real estate, his specialty. I praised the Elias Vance Foundation, laying it on just thick enough. What a beautiful way to honor a lost friend, I said, looking him directly in the eye. It takes a truly strong character to turn tragedy into something so positive. He ate it up. The vanity, the pride. It was his greatest weakness. He loved being seen as the benevolent genius, the tragic hero. Over the next few months, I wove myself into the fabric of his life. Sloan Mercer became a fixture. I attended his parties, I joined his clubs, I offered shrewd, insightful business advice that always seemed to benefit him. I became his confidant, the brilliant, mysterious woman who understood his vision. It was a strange dual existence. I'd be sitting across from him at a dinner party, laughing at his jokes, while inside I was screaming. I'd be in his office, looking at the architectural plans for the new Vance Towers, a monstrosity of glass and steel being built on the very edge of our family's land, and I would have to clench my fists under the table to keep them from shaking. I learned everything about him. His business was a house of cards, leveraged to the hilt. The success of Vance Towers was critical. Its failure would ruin him. He was engaged to a woman named Isabella, a sweet, somewhat naive heiress from an old money family. A merger, not a marriage. He didn't love her. He loved what she represented, stability, pedigree. And I could see she was lonely, living in the gilded cage Julian had built for her. One evening, I was at his penthouse apartment for a small gathering. He was showing off a new painting, some abstract, expensive thing. I wandered onto the balcony, the same balcony that overlooked the lake, my lake, our lake. I felt a presence beside me. Beautiful, isn't it? Julian said, sipping his whiskey. So peaceful. It is, I replied, my voice neutral. It holds a lot of history. It does, he said, and for a fleeting moment, I saw a shadow cross his face, a flicker of something that wasn't smugness. Was it guilt or just memory? I lost someone very dear to me in that lake, my best friend. The audacity took my breath away. I had to grip the railing. I'm sorry to hear that, I managed to say. What happened? He sighed, a perfectly practiced sound of sorrow. A terrible accident, a storm. He slipped. I was there. I tried to save him. He trailed off, shaking his head. I live with that every day. The what-ifs. The lie was so smooth, so effortless. He'd told it so many times he probably believed it himself. The seed of my plan, which had been forming in the dark corners of my mind, suddenly crystallized. Ruining his business wasn't enough. Taking his money wasn't enough. I had to expose this lie. I had to make him admit it, in front of everyone. I had to take away the thing he cherished most, his perfect, untouchable reputation. I needed to get closer. I needed to find a crack in his armor, a pressure point. and I thought I knew what it was. His fiancée, Isabella. She wasn't a villain, she was another one of his victims, living a life of quiet desperation. Perhaps she could be an ally, or perhaps she was the key that would unlock his downfall. I looked at Julian, offering a sympathetic smile. "You can't blame yourself forever, Julian. Accidents happen." He nodded, patting my hand on the railing. "You're a good friend, Sloane." If only he knew. The hunter was inside the walls. The gilded cage was about to be his prison. Trust is a fortress. You build it stone by stone, over years. But to bring it down, you only need to find one crack, one single hairline fracture, and then you apply pressure. My pressure point was Isabella. Getting close to her was easier than I'd expected. Underneath her polished society page exterior, she was desperately lonely. Julian was always busy, always distracted. He provided her with everything she wanted except the one thing she needed: genuine connection. I started small, complimenting her taste in art at a gallery opening, asking her opinion on a charity board I was supposedly joining. I was never overbearing, just present. A friendly, neutral face in a world of sycophants and rivals. We started having lunch, then coffee. Slowly, carefully, I began to share little, fabricated pieces of Sloane's past. Stories of loss, of betrayal. I never gave details, just enough to make her feel that I, too, understood pain. One afternoon, we were at her home, a cavernous, sterile penthouse that felt more like a museum than a home. The rain was sheeting down outside, much like the night Elias was taken from me. "He's just different lately," she confessed, swirling the wine in her glass. She was opening up. This was it. "More secretive, more stressed. It's all this Vance Towers project. He's poured everything into it. Everything." "Ambition can be a heavy burden," I said softly. "It's not just ambition," she whispered, her eyes wide with the fear she was finally voicing. "It's like he's haunted. He has nightmares. He talks in his sleep." My blood ran cold. Haunted. "What does he say?" I asked, keeping my tone light, curious. She shook her head. "It's hard to make out, mumbling, but I've heard a name. Elias. He says, 'I'm sorry, Elias,' over and over." The room seemed to tilt. "I'm sorry, Elias." It was an admission, a confession whispered in the vulnerable dark where his carefully constructed mask slipped. This was the crack. His subconscious was my ally. "Grief is a long journey," I said, placing a comforting hand over hers. Perhaps he still blames himself for his friend's accident. "Perhaps," Isabella said, but she didn't look convinced. A seed of doubt had been planted. While I worked on Isabella, I was also working on Julian's empire. As Sloane, I had gained his absolute trust in business matters. He'd made me a silent partner in a new, risky venture, a logistics company that was supposed to supply materials for Vance Towers. What he didn't know was that I was also the silent owner of the company's biggest rival. I was playing both sides, and I was about to orchestrate a collision. I arranged for a series of unfortunate delays. Shipments got lost, permits were mysteriously held up, key personnel were poached by my rival company with offers they couldn't refuse. The costs for Vance Towers began to skyrocket. Julian's confidence started to fray. The smooth, unflappable businessman began to show the stress fractures. He'd call me late at night, his voice tight with anxiety. "Sloane, I don't understand it. It's like the universe is conspiring against me." "The universe doesn't conspire, Julian. It just corrects course." He had no idea how right he was. The final piece of the puzzle fell into place on the anniversary of Elias's death. I knew it would be a difficult day for Julian, a day the ghosts would be louder. I suggested a small, private dinner at his place, just him, Isabella, and me. A show of support. The atmosphere was heavy. Julian was drinking more than usual, his eyes distant. Isabella was watching him with a new, wary attention. I steered the conversation towards the past, towards memories. It's a shame Elias never got to see what you've built, Julian. He would have been so proud. He flinched, his glass freezing halfway to his lips. Yes, well, life doesn't always go to plan. No, it doesn't. It's strange, isn't it? How one moment, one single decision, can change everything. His eyes met mine across the table. For a second, I saw a flicker of something raw and terrified in their depths. He was remembering. He was seeing the push, the fall, the decision. What do you mean? Isabella asked, her voice small. Oh, nothing specific, just philosophizing. Don't you ever wonder, Julian, what if you'd grabbed his arm that night? What if you'd been a second faster? The what-ifs must be a special kind of hell. The color drained from his face. He stood up abruptly, his chair scraping loudly against the floor. I need some air. He stumbled out onto the balcony, into the rain. Isabella looked at me, her face a mask of confusion and dawning horror. The seed of doubt I had planted was now a sapling breaking through the soil. I had applied the pressure. The cracks were widening. Julian Torn's perfect world was beginning to tremble. The foundation was rotten, and I was the earthquake he never saw coming. The next phase of my revenge was ready to begin. The collapse. The endgame is always the most dangerous part. It's when the predator, cornered and desperate, is at its most volatile. I had to be precise, surgical. I had to pull the threads of his life in just the right order, so that when he fell, the whole world would see it wasn't an accident. It was justice. The first thread was his business. The delays at Vance Towers had become critical. Investors were getting nervous. The banks were calling. I, as Sloan, presented him with a solution. A massive cash infusion from a silent offshore partner. A partner that was, of course, another shell company I controlled. He was so desperate he didn't do his due diligence. He signed the papers, giving this mysterious entity a huge stake in his company, and more importantly, access to all his financial records. That's when I found it. The smoking gun. Buried in a labyrinth of offshore accounts, I found the transfers. Millions of dollars, siphoned from the Elias Vance Memorial Foundation. He wasn't just a killer, he was a thief, stealing from the ghost of the man he murdered. The hypocrisy was breathtaking. The second thread was Isabella. The night that the dinner had broken something between them. She came to me terrified. He's not the man I thought he was, Sloan, she wept. The things he says in his sleep, it's not just I'm sorry. Last night he said, I didn't mean to push you. She looked at me, her eyes wide with terror. He pushed him? The dam had broken. I comforted her, but inside I was triumphant. I encouraged her to think of her own future, her own safety. I connected her with a lawyer, a fierce woman I knew would protect her interests. Within a week, Isabella had left him. She took her family's money and influence with her, and in the process, she gave a statement to her lawyers about his nocturnal confessions. It wasn't admissible in court, but it was a weapon I intended to use. Julian was now completely isolated. His business was a leaking ship, his personal life was in ruins, and the walls were closing in. He was paranoid, lashing out at everyone, except me. I was still Sloan, his rock, his only ally. That's when I set the final stage, the grand opening of Vance Towers. He had managed to complete it, but just barely. It was a hollow shell, propped up by my money and his lies. He planned a huge event, a press conference to showcase his triumph, to prove to the world that Julian Thorne was still a king. He had no idea I was planning a very different kind of show. The day of the opening, the atrium of Vance Towers was packed. Press, investors, socialites, everyone who was anyone was there. Julian stood at the podium, beaming, a picture of success, but I could see the sweat on his brow, the tremor in his hands. I stood at the back of the room, watching. My heart was calm. This was for Elias. Julian gave his speech, full of pomp and self-congratulation. He even mentioned Elias, his voice dripping with false sentiment. This tower stands as a testament to my dear and departed friend. That was my cue. I walked calmly to a separate podium that had been set up for investors. There were murmurs of confusion. Julian's smile faltered. "Julian," I said into the microphone, my voice clear and cold, echoing through the vast space. "That's a beautiful sentiment, but I think it's time we heard the whole story. Don't you?" The room fell silent. All cameras swung to me. "What are you doing, Sloane?" Julian said, his voice a mixture of confusion and rising panic. "My name," I said, locking eyes with him from across the room, "is not Sloane Mercer." I clicked a button on a remote. The giant screen behind Julian, which had been displaying the Vance Towers logo, flickered to life. It showed the financial documents, the stolen funds from the foundation, highlighted in bright red. Gasps filled the room. "This is what greed looks like," I announced, my voice ringing with a power I hadn't felt in years. "Stealing from the memory of your dear, departed friend." "This is nonsense, lies," Julian shouted, his face purple with rage and fear. I clicked the button again. Now audio began to play. It was a recording I'd made of one of our late-night calls, edited for maximum impact. His own voice, strained and desperate, filled the atrium. "It's like the universe is conspiring against me. I live with that every day. The what-ifs. What if I'd grabbed his arm? What if I'd been a second faster?" "The what-ifs, Julian?" I said, my voice dropping, becoming quieter, more deadly. The room leaned in to listen. "The what-if isn't about being faster. The what-if is about why you didn't tell the truth. The what-if is about why you told everyone my brother slipped, when you know, and I know, that you pushed him." The silence was absolute. You could have heard a pin drop. Julian stood frozen, his mouth agape. He was exposed, laid bare. The brilliant businessman was a fraud, a thief, and now, in the eyes of everyone present, a murderer. "You," he stammered, his eyes wide with a horrifying dawning recognition. He was finally seeing past Sloane's cool exterior, past the designer clothes and the changed hair. He was seeing the ghost he thought he'd drowned. "You... It can't be. Ilara?" The name echoed in the silent atrium. I smiled. A small, cold, final smile. "Hello, Julian," I said. "I told you I'd never let you forget him." The room erupted. Chaos. Shouted questions, the flash of cameras, security rushing toward the podium. Julian just stood there, broken. His world, his reputation, his future, utterly destroyed in a matter of minutes. He was left completely and utterly speechless. I didn't wait for the arrest. I didn't wait for the fallout. I turned and walked away, the cacophony of his ruin fading behind me. I walked out of the tower he built on my brother's grave, and I didn't look back. I stand here again, at the edge of the lake. The water is calm today, a deep, peaceful blue. The ghost in my reflection is quieter now. She's no longer screaming. She's at rest. Julian Thorne was convicted on multiple counts of fraud, embezzlement, and obstruction of justice. The police reopened Elias's case. With Isabella's testimony and the pressure of the public scandal, Julian eventually confessed. He admitted to the push, to the cover-up, to everything. He's in a prison of his own making, and he will be for a very, very long time. The Vance Towers project was abandoned, a skeletal monument to his greed. The land, our land, is being returned to its natural state. The Elias Vance Foundation was restructured, its funds used to create a genuine wildlife preserve around the lake. A true legacy. I got my revenge. It was complete, it was total. I had wanted him to feel the betrayal, the helplessness, the fall. And he did. I had dismantled his life piece by piece, and I had exposed the rotten core for all the world to see. But as I look at my reflection, the face that is both Ilara and the ghost of Sloane, I feel a hollow victory. The rage that fueled me for so long has burned out, leaving only ashes. It didn't bring Elias back. The silence where his presence used to be is still there. It will always be there. Revenge, it's a fire that burns the one who holds it just as surely as it burns the target. I became a master of deception. I lived a lie. I used people, even Isabella, as pawns in my game. I have to live with that. I became the very thing I sought to destroy, a manipulator, a liar. Was it worth it? Yes. And no. Yes, because a monster was exposed and stopped. He can never hurt someone like that again. Justice, true justice, was served in a way the courts never could have managed alone. But no, because the cost to my own soul was immense. The Ilara I was died in the lake with her brother that night. The woman who walked away from Vance Towers is someone else, someone marked by a darkness I can never fully erase. So what is the lesson in all this? The moral of this story of betrayal and revenge? It's that the pursuit of vengeance will change you. It will harden you. It will force you to walk through shadows you can never fully leave behind. But it can also be a force for balance. It can be the only language that tyrants and monsters understand. The true victory wasn't in his destruction. It was in my survival. It was in reclaiming my brother's memory from the lies. It was in finding the strength not to forget, but to finally begin to heal. I kneel down and touch the water. The reflection ripples and reforms. The ghost is still there, but she's smiling now. A sad, gentle smile. It's over, Elias. You can rest now. And for the first time since that stormy night, I believe that I can too.